time is now 7 o'clock, and I'm going to reconvene to open session and call to order the regular board meeting for Indian Prairie School District 204 on Monday, June 11th, 2018. Jackie, can you call the roll, please?
Miss Peel.
Here.
Mr. Karubas.
Here.
Miss Price.
Here.
Mr. Rasak.
Here.
Miss Deming.
Here.
Mr. Rising.
Here.
Miss Donahue.
Here.
And with that, Ms. Peel, will you lead us in the pledge?
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And we begin with board salutes. Mr. Karubas, will you please start?
The board salutes Wabanzi Valley band teacher Chris Dandelis, who was recently named a 2018 Chicagoland Outstanding Music Educator by Quinlan and Fabish. Nominations are accepted throughout the music education community and are voted on by a committee comprised of all of the previous award recipients. Each year, 3 educators are selected in the elementary, junior high division, and 3 are selected in the high school collegiate division. Congratulations, Chris, on this outstanding award. Nice job.
Thank you. Ms. Price?
The board salutes Nequa Valley Boys Track Team, who won the Class 3A state title at the IHSA Boys State Track Finals at Eastern Illinois University. The Wildcats scored points in 9 events with a total of 52 team points. Congratulations to Coach Mike Kennedy and all the Wildcats on this wonderful achievement.
Mr. Rising?
The board would like to salute the Indian Prairie Education Association and the Indian Prairie Classified Association for supporting students in all 3 District 204 high schools through scholarships. The Indian Prairie Education Association awarded 5 scholarships, and the Indian Prairie Classified Association awarded 4 scholarships. We appreciate both our associations for supporting our students through their scholarship program. Congratulations to all the scholarship recipients.
Thank you. It's the summer, and we're going to miss our student reports, which is always a highlight of our meetings, so we miss you students already. With that, though, we still have our superintendent.
me.
Superintendent report.
I'm still here.
So we have the superintendent report.
Okay, so I will start. This is our first board meeting since graduation ceremonies took place in our 3 valleys, and it was a long but rewarding day. We saw almost 2,400 students move across the stage to the next stage in their lives. So we shook a lot of hands that day. My mother saw the graduation ceremonies for Springfield Public Schools. You know, they had those on TV, and she said, "Do you have to shake all those kids' hands, or you are?" Yes, we do. So in addition to the parents, family members, and friends that attended, we had over 2,300 viewers watching it online via live streaming, and that was a significant increase over 1,500 from last year. But most interesting was the number of viewings from other countries, including India, Pakistan, Germany, Syria. So I hope you had a chance to see the video that folks did. The Clayton collapsed 15 hours into 1 minute. So if you haven't seen that, please take a look at that on our website or on Twitter, so you can get an idea of what that day's like for us. This past week, we conducted ALICE training, or active shooter drill training, for over 100 of our district administrators at Nequa Valley. We were fortunate to have police officers from both the city of Naperville and the city of Aurora participate. They served as instructors, mentors, and even active threats. They pretended to be our threats during the drills. We just want to thank them. We're incredibly thankful for the strong partnership we have with both departments, and we thank them for lending their expertise on this very important project. And we have a couple administrators positions on the agenda tonight, so I'm ready to move on to that if you're ready for me to do that.
Yes.
And the first is for our new position as the principal of our STEPS program. It's a new position, but a familiar face. Well, Kim will ask you to stand. So Kim Maloney has been assistant principal at Mattia Valley since 2015. Kim has had an active role. Well, you can stay up. Kim has had an active role working with students with special needs and their families in her role at Mattia, and when you were assistant principal at Gregory as well, because I remember working with you and a few those situations. So energy and enthusiasm are two words that come to mind when you think of Kim, and I know that she is going to bring that to this leadership role. I'm very excited to recommend Kim Maloney for your approval to the position of principal for our STEPS program.
I recommend that the Board of Education approve Kimberly Maloney as STEPS principal as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, Jackie, call the roll, please.
And I apologize, my computer's running slow now.
Board docs,
It wasn't
there's
earlier.
issues with board docs.
I
think.
apologize. Who made the motion and the second? Motion?
Chris and Mark.
And Mark, thank you. So
It's not going to go down just because of you, Kim, I promise. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I feel very honored.
Let them vote first. Let them vote, though.
Haven't voted yet. You never know.
Yeah, you don't know. You do not know.
Yeah, pay no attention to the one before you.
Okay, Ms. Price?
Yes.
Mr. Rising?
Aye, yes.
Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Mr. Karubas?
Yes.
Ms. Demming?
Aye.
Ms. Peel?
Aye.
Mr. Rasak?
Aye. Motion passes.
It's official.
Congratulations.
Kim, do you want to introduce your cheering section over there? Kim, you want to introduce your cheering section?
Sure. This is one of the STEPS teachers who
Oh, yeah.
surprised me by coming. This is Mike Ackerman. We were fortunate to work at Mateo Valley High School together. A+ award winner as
That's
well.
right. That's right. Hey.
My biggest fan, my husband. He sat in here before with Mr. Severson, and he's here again. And then my daughter from Kansas came in from her silver volleyball program and stuff to be here tonight for me. So this is Abby. What an absolute privilege that you have given and blessed my family with. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, right?
Now it's for real. Okay, our second position is the assistant principal position at Gregory Middle School. We're pleased to bring forward Matthew Clark for this position, so Matt will have you stand. Matt comes to us most recently from Manuka High School, where he is currently serving as assistant principal. Matt has both middle school and high school experiences. He's been a high school business teacher and a dean, as well as a 612 curriculum coordinator in the CTE area, and a middle school assistant principal. So we're excited to recommend for your approval Matthew Clark for position of assistant principal at Gregory Middle School.
Do I have a motion to approve Matt Clark as assistant principal at Gregory Middle School?
I move that the Board of Education approve Matthew Clark as assistant principal at Gregory Middle School as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and second. Any discussion? Hearing none, Jackie, call the roll, please.
Ms. Price?
Aye.
Ms. Peel?
Aye.
Mr. Rasak?
Aye.
Mr. Rising?
Aye.
Ms. Demming?
Aye.
Mr. Karubas?
Yes.
Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Congratulations, Matt. Yes, he does.
Introduce.
Second. Matt, do you want to introduce your cheering section? You've got a nice cheering section there, too.
My lovely wife Kristen, and then our two daughters, Juliet, who is 8, and Beatrice, who is 5.
And your boss.
Well, we know him, right?
My new boss, Steve Severs. Really, really excited to be on board and excited to be working at Gregory and in the district.
So welcome to Indian Prairie.
We now move to our extensive consent agenda items, and I need a motion to approve consent agenda items F through AA.
I would actually like to pull, where is it now? Hang on, I can't find it.
V as in Victor.
Thank you. Item V, it was so far down.
Okay, still need a motion.
I'll make a motion for consent agenda items F through double A excluding V.
So I have a motion, do I have a second?
Second?
Motion and a second. Any other discussion on those items? Hearing none, Jackie, call the roll, please.
I apologize, it'll take me a moment, especially because it's slow, but I have to fix this or else it will record the vote incorrectly. So I'll move this as soon as it will
Sure.
start responding.
You're doing a great job, Jackie.
I think Stan hacked the internet at his last meeting.
Last meeting.
Yeah, that's probably his fault.
That's right.
All that I can get a bunch of loops Word Docs is acknowledging an issue. I called them a couple minutes ago on their end, so that maybe explains the slowness.
Yes, it might. Tell him this is not a convenient
Yeah, I just
time.
called them, I stepped out.
It's painfully slow.
I feel like we need some background music.
Yes.
It's okay, I don't have to get up early tomorrow.
Well, that'd be one of us.
Oh, yeah, Lori doesn't either. Me either.
This Lori does.
Got 5 a.m. swim drop off.
Too bad.
I'll give you a call.
Give it a shot here. All right, let me see if I can make this work now. No, no. Oh, God.
What am I asking you to do?
Yeah.
Wow, that doesn't give me any.
Hey, I didn't get to the last notes yet. You got time.
Yes, well, I'm going to just tell you, I'm going to try one more time, and if not, I'm just going to do this on paper because it keeps flipping me out of the motion.
Okay.
Does that sound familiar? Oh, gosh, what the heck?
So yeah, F through double A excluding V.
Excluding VF, got it. That was Mark,
Justin.
Justin. I wrote it down. Okay, quick, let's do this while it seems to be working. Mr. Rising,
Aye.
Mr. Carubus,
Yes.
Ms. Price,
Yes.
Ms. Donahue,
Aye.
Ms. Deming,
Aye.
excuse me, Ms. Peel,
Aye.
Mr. Rasak.
Aye. Motion passes. Okay, we now move to V. I do need a motion in order to discuss this, so do I have a motion?
I move to approve the 2018-2019 District Concussion Oversight Team.
And a
Second?
Motion and a second. Ms. Price?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the approving the team, but I just wanted to bring something up for discussion and, just wanted to get opinions of the board. I know I asked you questions of how often they met and things that they suggested, and that's those sort of questions. But when I was reading through our policies on this, the board approves an emergency and I don't have it with me because I don't have my phone with me, and I'm not going to look it up yet, but they approve that aspect of any emergency procedures, right? And I wonder if, we're approving the team. Does the board feel that there's a need to approve the recommendations that come out of those discussions? And if we're approving emergency procedures, that's our role. to me, it just seems logical that we would approve the actual protocol and the return to play, return to learn procedures that have been recommended by the oversight team. Just want thoughts.
My thoughts on this, you know, it's a little outside the agenda, but to kind of give feedback on it, once you read the statute, it becomes, I think, a little bit more clear. It's underlying the policy. And it gets a little scarier, too. The statute says that the board will develop the emergency action plan, which, you know, we're not anywhere near qualified to be developing an emergency action plan. So the fact that the policy changed that to say that the team will put together the plan, I think was a good correction on what the statute read. So you read that, and then you read it down further, and it says that the committee shall establish the return to play protocol.
Right.
So it's vacant. There's no direction in the statute on whether the board should be approving.
And that's why I brought this up. I mean, is that something that, you know, the board, you know, I don't want to try and mix staff role versus board role, but I go back to, you know, when the board has to approve emergency procedures, well, I guess, again, it just doesn't make sense why we wouldn't want to approve those protocols, because it's about student safety, you know, make sure that they're either, again, returning to play or returning to learn in a safe environment. And it, I mean, it just.
Part of the statute as well talks about that the doctors, the nurses, the coaches that are athletic directors that are part of that committee must have concussion certification.
Right.
And they do.
Yes.
And I think in good faith, the statute was written to make sure that people who need to be making those critical decisions regarding concussions, that committee is the one that's in charge of that, but the board always retains the authority to establish who's going to be on that committee,
Okay.
which I think provides the necessary oversight, maybe not so much from a critical knowledge piece about concussions, but who is actually making up this team, that the board is ensuring that they are professionals who, one, are certified and have the baseline knowledge to make those type of medical decisions for something like this.
Okay. I mean, go ahead.
And I have full confidence in this team that you put together between athletic directors, physicians, nurses, athletic trainers. I mean, you covered everybody pretty much. And like
Yeah,
you said, they have to have training in regards to concussions. My question is that once they do establish practice and procedures and the protocol for that, is that published publicly, or is that something that just is distributed within the athletic departments?
Yeah, great question. So currently, we provide 3 pieces of documentation. One is the info sheet, and that's available to parents. We distribute it when we are at parent nights, because as we know, sometimes students have concussions and they're not even involved with a school-sponsored event. They are made available in the nurse's office, in the athletic department's offices as well, and then also at parent meetings that take place for whether it be in the season of sport for that particular sport. The return to play and the return to learn protocols, especially the return to learn protocols, are in the nurse's office, and then once the nurse is established as that contact for return to learn, so as soon as that contact is made, then those are distributed to the parent and then also to the teachers as well, so that they know at what level as they progress through from level 1 all the way through level 4 of where they're at. And that return to learn is really the key, because we're not going to start the return to play until they get to level 4, as indicated in the return to learn protocol.
So thanks for that answer. So here's kind of where, because I'm kind of like Lori, and Justin makes a great point too. And, you don't want to overstep your bounds of what a board role is and what a staff, or in this case, a committee role is that we've, established and voted on. And a lot of it, the protocols and procedures that they write, is going to be dictated by state statute or IHSA, what they deem is appropriate. So a lot of it is already probably pretty much already completed for them heading into it. But since the board ultimately is responsible, I guess, and again, without clouding the roles, I think it would be good, without holding up this being released to parents or this being released at the beginning of the year, I do think it would be good if the board got to review it.
Absolutely.
Just to give it another set of eyes between all of our backgrounds, that we have. Again, not experts on this by any means, or doctors, but it might not be bad to get a quick view at it. But again, I don't want to hold things up either.
Yeah, no, I don't think it would. Pending board approval of the new members on there, we would convene a meeting. If any changes were to be made, we can definitely bring those back to the board in time before we started
Yeah,
to
or just have
disseminate
Karen
them.
share it with us or something.
So, and I get where you guys are going, and I understand that, but the agenda item is, and I think to Justin's point, is to just
The
to
committee.
begin to approve the team.
And I have no issue with the team. I think it's like Mark said, it's a great team we've put together. But I did let Karen know in my questions that I would be pulling this for discussion. I apologize if it's not the appropriate place. But I did want to just and I'm not going to die on this, so I'm not going to die on this sword. But I just wanted to know kind of what the rest of the board thought. But that could be a discussion for another time. So if it's not appropriate now.
My mic off. We can certainly, the point is, we have to approve the concussion oversight team first. And so then they'll review those return to play and return to learn protocols. So we can certainly bring those to the board once this team has met and reviewed them and we know what they are for the upcoming school year. I can certainly share those with the board.
Okay.
Okay. Any other discussion? With that, then, can we have our vote? Jackie?
Sure, I'm just gonna have to wing it though, because.
That's okay.
Mine's shut down too.
Okay, Lori Price,
Aye.
Justin Carubas.
Yes.
Kathy Pio,
Aye.
Lori Donahue,
Aye.
Mr. Rasak, sorry.
Aye.
That's what happens when I don't read it
Yeah.
off of my sheet, right? Sorry. Mr. Rising,
Aye.
Ms. Deming.
Aye. Motion passes. Okay, we're going to move to our action item. I do need a motion that the Board of Education approve FY 2019 tentative budget.
Make a motion for the approval of the fiscal year 2019 tentative budget as presented.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Deming, second. Good. And
Good evening, board
Strange.
members. Tonight is the tentative budget. As you just stated, you'll be taking action on this, and we'll be putting it up for display, and July 23rd, we'll be coming back to the Board of Education for,
Jay, you're not on for some reason.
I had my printout, and I don't know what.
and then, is that better?
Yes.
On July 23rd, we'll come back for the budget hearing and budget approval process. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about the evidence-based funding formula. We'll go over both the operating and non-operating budget and next steps. And I really want to take some time to talk about the evidence-based funding formula because this is the first time that we really budgeted using that new formula. And I'm going to specifically kind of show you some of the differences between the old formula and the new formula. And I brought out a laser pen for this so that I can point out on the screen behind you. Yeah, I won't hit you, Mr. President. For fiscal year 2018, 19, 20, 21, and 22, we have up there what would be under the old foundation formula, how we would have been budgeted if they had not changed, the state had not changed the funding formula. And then we've got the evidence-based funding formula and the differences in that. Across the top, you can see each of the fiscal years, and you can see the foundation formula. I highlighted some of the cells so that you can see them more clearly. The general state aid was one of the two levers that we received our finances from the state. All of the others below the general state aid, the four categoricals here, disregard the evidence-based funding, and all of the categoricals below were separately funded. Under evidence-based funding formula, the four categoricals above become a part of the general state aid, which is now your hold harmless. So when you look at the old formula, the general state aid dollar amount, we were expecting to receive $23 million in fiscal year 18, $21.5 million in 19, 16.8 in 20, and then we dropped down to 12 in 21 and in 22. The reason for that is that the formula was based on our property values and our student population, and our property values were going up and our student population was dropping. So we were going to see a significant reduction in general state aid in the foundation level under the old formula. That impacted our bottom line in general state aid and our bottom line overall. And when you see in 21 and in 22 that we top out at 12.6 and 12.4, we were actually falling out of the foundation formula at that time and going into the alternative formula. So the evidence-based funding model really did come at a good time for Indian Prairie School District and is really helping us out. What you'll see then is on the bottom line what our total state revenue is: 39, 42, 37, 33, and then 33. So we lose a significant amount of money under the foundation formula. When you look at the evidence-based funding formula, all of these become rolled into the new tier money, or hold harmless money. That's your base funding minimum of $37 million. In fiscal year 18, and if you recall, we passed this budget using the old foundation formula. And then after we passed the budget, the law changed, and we're getting funded based on the evidence-based funding model. We picked up $907,000 in tier money. In addition to that, $184,000 in bilingual money. That tier money of $907,000 rolls into the base funding minimum the next year. So the base funding minimum continues to climb each year. For this, I conservatively put in there that we were only going to receive what we received this year, $907,000 from the state, because the state hadn't passed their budget at the time that we put this presentation together. And the state has not, and I called them today, determined how the distribution of the new funding model is going to be for fiscal year 19. Hopefully that will happen in the next couple of weeks. So what happens to us overall when you look at both the tier money, the base funding minimum, and the categorical grants? You can see that we have a significant increase year over year based off of the foundation formula to the evidence-based funding formula. When you get down to 2022, you can see that it's quite a swing from 33 to almost $53 million in state money. What does that mean on this slide? In January 2017, I put together a forecast for the Board of Education, and it was a 5-year forecast. And in that 5-year forecast, that state revenue was really hitting us pretty hard, and we were losing quite a bit of money, and we were looking at a loss of almost $12 million at the end of the day when you look at our current budget. The Last 2 years, again, would be when we would be in the alternative funding formula. Under the evidence-based funding formula, with all of the things that we know about our expenditures at this point in time, you can see that we can go out to fiscal year '22 and still have a balanced budget. Now, I've got to tell you that when I put the budget together and built this forecast, I did it conservatively. I did not put in there that we were going to receive any growth in state money, but I think it's safe to say that we will receive more money from the state, given that they passed the budget. It's got $350 million in there. We're a Tier 2 district, and we should be receiving more money, and I'll talk about that in this slide. Of our comparable districts, there's 1 Tier 2 district, 2 Tier 3 districts, and 5 Tier 4 districts. The tier represents the need of the district to fund all of the different elements of evidence-based funding. We are the only Tier 2 districts of our comparable districts, and it says on this that our adequacy level is about 80%. That means that we need about 20% more in funds, which comes out to roughly $72 million, to implement all of the elements of the funding model. What you can also see on this slide, when you look at us, we end here with our ability to fund, and we should go to here. A number of our Tier 4 comparable districts have enough funds on hand now without any assistance from the state to implement all of the elements of the evidence-based funding formula. There's 27 elements, and they break it down into 3 domains, really. There's the core investment area, which talks about core teachers, specialist teachers, which would be physical education, art, instructional facilitators, core interventionists, guidance counselors, school site staff, nurses, supervisory aides, librarians, library aides, principals, assistant principals, and substitute teachers. The other domain is the per student investment, and this deals more with the kind of the picture of your students. How many gifted students do you have, and how much money does it take to educate those students? Professional development, the instructional materials, the assessments, the computers, the student activities, the operations and maintenance to support the facilities for the students, the central office staff, employee salaries and benefits across the district, and employee benefits and salaries in the central office. And the last domain is the additional investments domain. And if you think of that, that's really the low-income English language learners and students with special education needs that need additional resources. And each of those domains have elements underneath them. Each of those elements have a factor for how many staff members or how much money you should be dedicating per student for each of those to occur. And what you find out is that when you apply that to Indian Prairie School District, we're falling short. Now, when I said that our budget is conservative, in the next couple of weeks, hopefully the state of Illinois comes out with what their distribution will be. Under the old model, under the foundation formula, it was an independent, isolated event. I could figure ours out without needing to know or care what was happening across the state. But under the evidence-based funding model, I have to know what's happening with the staff and the demographics and the needs of all of the districts in the state to figure out what's our portion of that. So it's a little bit more difficult. So when you put all of that into place, our fiscal year 2019 tentative budget, you can see that I conservatively at the state sources level have the $49,399,548 that we received this year. I did not even add the $907,000. I didn't compound that. So I think it's safe to say that we're going to receive at least just shy of $1 million more than we expected. Our operating highlights, the local revenue went up by 2.1%, which is the consumer price index. The state revenue increased, as we just discussed, because of the evidence-based funding model. Federal revenue remains flat, and our total revenue is $340,906,917. This is a big switch for Indian Prairie School District to be receiving more money from the state of Illinois, and it's a real shot in our arm. We go from 12.2% in state money to 14.5%. That's a significant increase as a school district. Other highlights of the six funds, the education fund is the highest with 83%. Our salaries and benefits, we're a people business. We can't do our jobs without having teachers and folks in front of class, and kids in classrooms. So that's the majority of where our money goes. Purchase services such as food service, transportation, and custodial maintenance outsourcing is all budgeted in here. So as you know, that we recently had a new bid for our custodial maintenance outsourcing. That has been updated. All of our salaries and benefits have been updated, and our operations and maintenance capital outlay is at $6.5 million. It's not at the $8 million that the consultant said we should be at, but it's much higher than it has been in a number of years. As I said, all salaries and benefits expenses have been updated. Custodial maintenance contract's been updated. We're showing an excess of $1.2 million. We're at a 30.31 fund balance percentage, so we should absolutely receive recognition out of this. And our categorical payments are prorated at the fiscal year 17 level, and that's what they were prorated at for fiscal year 18. So I'm anticipating a slight proration in our categoricals in fiscal year 19. On the non-operating side, as you know, we recently paid off our 2 debt certificates, so that's reflected in this budget. Capital outlay for projects of $2 million, and that's continued work towards air conditioning is in here. Later on tonight, you're going to hear a resolution to hopefully be able to transfer any remaining funds at the end of fiscal year 18 from Fund 10 into Fund 60. I think that's a wise move to try and move some revenue into Fund 60 so that the Operations and Maintenance Department continue to move ahead with safety and security projects, elementary air conditioning, and some of our deferred maintenance needs. So we've done that once. This will be the second time that we do that. Before the end of July of this summer, we will be closing on the second payment of the Country Lakes property. As you recall, we sold that to the Naperville Park District, and they paid it in 2 installments. We'll receive our second installment before the end of July, and we'll finally be closed with that property. That money will go into Fund 60 for operations and maintenance projects. And then this next fiscal year, in fiscal year 19, we'll also be receiving the second payment of our 25 acres that we sold to MI Homes. So that'll be a nice push into capital projects as well. So we'll be able to get some work out of capital projects and hopefully start to whittle away at some of our operations and maintenance needs. The board tonight, after you've done with your questions, will hopefully approve this tentative budget. We'll post it tomorrow. We'll have the final hearing and approval on July 23rd. We've got both the internal and external audits going on at this time. Mr. Razak sat in on the vetting of some new auditors. The external audit will focus initially on procurement cards and activity accounts, and we'll bring some information back to the board next year about some of those findings. And the regular audit will be prepared and be ready by usually the first week in December. With that, I'll take any questions.
Questions?
Can you get back to slide 3 for me? The state funding that we did the foundation versus evidence-based. So that the evidence-based on your fiscal year 18, was that what they said, that 37,447? Yeah. Was that what the state said would be our minimum hold harmless, that we wouldn't fall below?
Correct.
Okay. But let me just make sure, that's assuming, it's assuming, is the hold harmless assuming that they put the 300 million or 350 million each year? Or is that separate? I don't recall.
That 350 million is an additional 350 million, and that is going towards the tier money. The way the tier money works, 50% of the tier money goes to tier 1 schools, 49% of the remaining tier money goes to tier 2 schools, and the last remaining 1% gets split between tier 3 and tier 4 schools.
Okay.
And the plan is to fill the buckets of all of the Tier 1 schools so that they become Tier 2. And now you're down to 3 tiers. You've got a Tier 2, Tier 3, and Tier 4. And then work on filling all of the buckets to the Tier 2 so that they become Tier 3. It's a 10-year plan to do that. A lot of information has come out that at the level that they're funding, it's really a 20-year plan. But the plan is much better for us than foundation formula.
Well, it's encouraging because I noticed that every year you had that going up, and I was under the misunderstanding that the tier funding was going towards Tier 1 first, and then it'll eventually get to Tier 2, but it looks like they are putting some in each bucket, which is the smart way to do it. So that's why you have that conservative calculation from year to year going up that you do. Okay?
Yeah, and I would imagine that as they get further out into 21 and 22, and more Tier 1 schools are at our level,
Right.
they'll fund Tier 2 schools at a faster rate.
And then one last question, and I know Justin had asked this, but I just wanted to clarify again. The state still owes us 2 categoricals,
Correct.
and each of those categoricals are $2.5 million
Correct.
each? Okay. And are you hearing we're gonna get them?
Well, as I talk with my cohorts in our comparable districts, everyone feels pretty optimistic that we'll receive all our categoricals before August 30th,
Okay.
which means that we can
That was-
apply them to this
I was
fiscal year.
gonna say, yeah, okay.
It's an election year.
Yeah, exactly. It's a good thing, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Rising. Other comments, questions?
Did I hear you correctly say that you suspect with the Tier 2 funding, then you think about $1 million more than what is already up there? Is that what you just said?
If you,
For this year?
yes, well, I know that fiscal year 2018, that Tier 2 allocation, that gets baked into the evidence-based funding minimum, or the hold harmless the following year. So that will be more that we'll receive this year.
Okay.
At the time that we put the budget together, the state hadn't passed theirs, and I was just hoping that they'd give us what they'd given us in fiscal year 18.
But I like that you kept it constant because to be conservative, yeah.
Others?
Is there any pension cost shift here?
No,
Is there any property tax freeze here?
no.
So our consultant says that in fiscal year 19, we should be spending 16.7 mil. Are we spending 16.7 mil on capital outlays and operations and maintenance?
No.
So the 8.6 is the average that was done for all of the years.
That's correct.
So this budget is going to contribute to our deferred maintenance deficit?
It could. And I say it could because not all of the items on the consultant's list, and you're right, it's an average. Some years it's less than 8 million, some years it's twice as much as 8 million. Some of those items, when we assess them, are functioning as well as they did when the consultants were here, and probably can get pushed off and not be considered deferred. But there's other items that the consultant believes will be reaching its end of life in 2 or 3 years that we're starting to have issues with now.
Thank you. The Engage 204 presentation gave us a number of priorities. One of them was class size, and they had a budget on that of $16.7 million annually. Does this budget include $16.7 million for addressing class size?
No, it does not. This budget includes addressing class size like we have in the last 3 or 4 years, which is not to reduce staff as our enrollment has reduced, and to take those FTE, which are not a lot, anywhere between 10 and 15 FTE, and reapply them where the need is.
And you mentioned about some of this budget, I think, or maybe with the transfer that's happening. Dealing with some of the other items that were addressed in the Engage 204 presentation. There was the $10 million in deferred maintenance. There was the elementary air conditioning that you talked about. Does this tentative budget address those two issues?
Not directly. Again, I think we're addressing those issues like we have in the past, piecemealing it. An example is that if this fiscal year 18 budget comes in good and we're able to transfer some money to Fund 60, and having paid off our debt certificates and having the sale of the property come in, that money now is not going to have to be earmarked for debt certificates. We're going to be able to use that for other needs with our physical plant. Now, if it's air conditioning or if it's deferred maintenance or if it's any of those items, those are things that we're going to have to bring to the board and figure out what's the priority of that work. If in the next 2 or 3 weeks we find out that we're going to receive $3 or $4 million more than we expected from the state because they've finished their calculation across all 860 districts, the superintendent has talked to the cabinet about needing to really look at what are those evidence-based funding items that we need to start to get to work on. And we'll probably be coming back to the board early in the fall and saying, here's the plan to work on both the evidence-based funding, but some of those other needs in the district.
The timing of the tentative budget with their inability to predict as historically done, basically relying on the states to give you estimate of what they're going to give you for the year. Is there a reason to change when the tentative budget is approved for our district and maybe delay that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. It would make my life much easier. We submitted data to the state 3 times this school year. Once in the fall and once in the winter, so that they could figure out what our fiscal year 18 budget would be. And shortly after they finally told us, and they sent out several variations of what they thought the breakout would be across the state for each of the districts. Ours went up and down a little bit, maybe a couple $100,000, nothing significant. But as soon as that was finished, they asked us to submit our data in April for fiscal year 19. So now that the budget's passed, hopefully they're working on that and we'll get that pretty soon. Maybe they'll get more streamlined. Maybe the politicians will get continue this positive movement in bipartisanship and we get it addressed earlier. But if we really want to know what we're going to get from the state, it might make sense to move back to their old schedule, which was do a tentative budget in August and a final budget in September. Then I would have much harder numbers for you.
Right.
Can I just remind you, though, because, it was kind of a fluke this year, we actually got a budget. It's kind of a fluke this year, we actually got a budget on time, right? We went to this because we finally gave up, because we weren't even knowing, even in September,
Sure.
what our state dollars were. So I'm not sure which schedule will ever really, it seems like we're always guessing what the state's going to give us at some point.
Yeah, next year will be different, sure.
Next year, there won't be an election, so we could be in the old mode of not meeting our budget deadline like we've been used to.
Under the circumstances, all those things considered, I support the tentative budget. Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Hearing none. Jackie, call the roll, please.
Okay, I might actually be able to do that. Mr. Rising?
Aye.
Excuse me. Ms. Deming? Aye. Mr. Rasak?
Aye.
Ms. Price?
Aye.
Mr. Karubas?
Yes.
Ms. Peel?
Aye.
Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Motion passes. Next agenda item is the board approving the resolution directing the school treasurer to transfer funds from the Education Fund, Fund 10, to Capital Projects Fund, Fund 60. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion for the approval resolution of the board directing the school treasurer to transfer funds from the Education Fund, Fund 10, to the Capital Projects Fund, Fund 60.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Jake?
Thank you, board members. This will be the second time that we come to the Board of Education and asked for money to be transferred into Fund 60. We did this, I believe, a year ago from Fund 20 to Fund 60, and we did that to continue our work towards completing the elementary classroom air conditioning projects, and Todd has been able to use that Fund 60 money to get that done. In addition to having that money in Fund 60 where you can get capital projects done, it gives the Operations and Maintenance Department some flexibility to expend those funds over fiscal years, and it doesn't have to align perfectly with the end of our operating budget. Our major construction season is in the summer, and if a project started and it's budgeted for this fiscal year and it's completed by June 30th, then we can pay it out this fiscal year. But as oftentimes happens, you have a rainy season, you can't get the bleachers in. Most of the project gets done in July and August. That's the next fiscal year. You budgeted in one year and you expended it in the next. So Fund 60 gives us that flexibility. This time we're asking for the board to approve the resolution to transfer funds from Fund 10 to Fund 60. Fund 10 is our education fund. The reason we changed funds is that with our property values rising and the consumer price index rising, our limiting rate in Fund 10 allows us to put money into Fund 10. We don't have to lend money from the other funds in the springtime to Fund 10 like we used to. So Fund 10 is in a better position, and we're actually able to spend down some money in the other funds. So that's what we're hoping to do.
That was actually going to be my question, because it always seemed like we always moved money to the education fund, and this time we're going to move it to the capital.
When the economy was in rough shape and property values are dropping, we were reaching our $4 limiting rate in the education fund, and we couldn't levy all of the money we needed in the education fund to get all of our work done. So we would run out of money in April.
Yeah.
And in May, and I'd come to the board and say, can we lend money for a couple of weeks until our taxes show up into that fund? And then we always paid it right back. But we don't have to do that anymore, and we've got the money in Fund 10 that's available now to transfer over. The transfer, you're passing the resolution tonight. The transfer actually won't occur until late August or September, when the auditors have completed all of their work, because we don't want to transfer us into a deficit in operating. We're just going to transfer enough that we can get some work done, but make sure that we have an excess in our operating funds across the board so that we can get recognition. And when that occurs, I'll make sure that I inform the board exactly how much we're moving and when it'll occur.
Questions? Susan?
Jay, thank you very much. I've asked this question before. I'd always like to get an update on the capital project side with our elementary air conditioning. Once we do what is budgeted to do or plan to do for this summer, where will we be from a percentage standpoint as far as completion?
I think we'll have one more final phase after that.
We'll be at 67% when we complete phase 4,
Of the classrooms.
the classrooms.
Still have work to do. So do we anticipate then how many more phases then will we have to?
It's a good question. There's a lot at play here. We've got the sale of our property, which will go into Fund 60. Hopefully, the state gives us additional revenue, which will be available for some items. I really suspect that in the fall, we'll be coming back to the board with a prioritized list of what we're going to do.
Because we still have deferred projects to do also.
True.
So that's how you're helping address the things that came up in Engage 204 that were around capital budget, like security and deferred maintenance and those types of things, by coming up with a proposal later on when you know how much money you have for a priority of how to spend that, right?
I think the entire cabinet's working on how to address the needs through the Engage 204. And, you know, we'll have probably some pretty healthy discussions about what we believe the priority of need is. And that hopefully can get addressed through the Fund 60 transfer, the sale of the property, and then if there's additional money that comes from the state through evidence-based funding, you know, I'm going to defer to our superintendent, but I think that there's probably going to have to be some need to put it towards some of those elements.
Yeah, I mean, I know we're having this discussion at a later time about Engage 204, but it would be good to see administration's recommendations, because ultimately it's the board's, you know, decision kind of where they want to go with that, but it would be good to see the administration's recommendations.
When we've done that in the past, safety and security seems to have always come to the top of it. Maybe it will again.
I want to acknowledge that this is where you're allocating funds for deferred maintenance, and so I think it's important. Some of it is in the budget, but some of it is here, and so I just want to make sure that I acknowledge that the district is doing work to try to whittle down deferred maintenance, and this is one of the means of doing it.
That you are correct. And you know, as we talked as a department, our plan is to try and come up with a approach that takes care of the deferred maintenance faster than new things fall onto it.
It's a good idea.
Other comments or questions? Hearing none. Jackie, call the roll, please.
Mr. Rising?
Aye.
Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Ms. Peel?
Aye.
Ms. Price?
Aye.
Mr. Rasak?
Aye.
Ms. Deming?
Aye.
Mr. Karubas?
Yes.
Motion passes. Our next agenda item is approval of policies. We're going to approve policies for first reading, 6:135 and 7:50. Do I have a motion?
I move to approve the policies for first reading, 6:135 and 7:50, as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Ms. Pease.
Hi, thank you. Just wanted to give you a little background information. Policy 6:135 is from Public Act 100-421, which requires the adoption of this policy. This is a new policy. We've not had this before, and it looks at providing educational programs for opportunities for each student to develop his or her maximum potential, not limited to grade or achievement or being gifted. That opportunity should be open for acceleration for all students. At the July 23rd board meeting, we will come back and present to you our recommendations for the three components of this policy: the decision-making process, the notification process, and the assessment process that adhere to this policy.
So can you briefly address that? And many of us asked questions. Ms. Peel correctly noted that 6:135 is a little bit in opposition to policy 7:50, especially in terms of kindergarten placement. So can you just address that briefly? We'll probably get
Certainly.
more of that in July.
Certainly. Previously, there was the age requirement in the policy was to be 5 years old by September 1st in order to enter kindergarten. There was an inclusion for first grade if there was an assessment of readiness provided and you were 6 years old on or before December 31st of that year. 6:135 overrides the age requirement and looks at readiness to enter kindergarten early as well as first grade early.
And who's going to determine that readiness? Is that the district, or will that be the state?
There are no state requirements for the process in order for determining readiness. They've not provided us with any guidance there, so our team is going to work together with our preschool principal, our curriculum department, Laura Johnston, and principals at the elementary level to look at what assessments and what we would determine to be ready for early entrance into kindergarten.
Okay. Questions?
What's best practice for kindergarten then?
I think for many years we've been successful with being 5 by September 1st, and for a variety of reasons, and children have been successful, and then once we've gotten to know them, if they needed to be accelerated, we've accelerated them at a later time. It's difficult to know if a student is ready to enter early when you don't know the student, so we'll have to really work to figure out how we will get to know students. And the policy does state that you have to have a process for review. It does not say that every student has to be allowed entrance early. So,
My question is just what was the timing? Would this take effect for 2018, 2019?
yes.
Okay, that was my. Okay.
We've had an inquiry.
I can
sure we did.
envision there'll probably be many more coming.
Any other questions?
We still don't require kindergarten, right?
It's
In
not
the state of
mandated.
Illinois.
It's not mandated.
All right.
Ready to vote?
Yep.
Jackie, call the roll.
Ms. Price?
Aye.
Ms. Peel?
Aye.
Mr. Karubas?
Yes.
Mr. Rising?
Aye.
Mr. Razak?
Aye.
Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Ms. Deming?
Aye.
Our next,
Mr. Razak, can we defer this next point so that the board can discuss amongst ourselves maybe some of those items and the people that are waiting can present on behavior?
yes, I would entertain that. So we can move to discussion item. But yes, I do need to do public comment first.
You can sit
So
down.
we have public comment, and it's for an agenda item. That's why we're doing this later. So it is now time for public comment for an agenda item. 30 minutes is allowed for public comment, and each person is limited to 3 minutes. When addressing the board, we ask that we respect the confidentiality and safety of our students and school district personnel. We also ask that those addressing the board be cognizant that this is an open meeting and is available to all age groups, and as such, ask that you consider who the audience member are this evening and keep comments age appropriate. Public comment represents the voice and opinion of the speaker. There will be no feedback from the board members during the meeting, but follow-up will be provided by an administrator as appropriate. We have one speaker, and it's Alona Orestes. Welcome, Alona. Thanks for waiting, too. Thank you, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Pleasure to be back up here again. I was reading the USA Today newspaper, and they stated in there that African American students are nearly 4 times as likely to be suspended. And it doesn't matter what program they're in, whether it is gifted and talented program, advanced science, advanced maths, right across the board. We noticed that in the agenda item regarding annual student behavior review, there seems to be a discrepancy there, similar to what was outlined in the newspaper. And we would like to ask that the board make waves and prevent and demolish any implicit bias that exists to ensure that equity reigns right across the board. The U.S. Secretary, John King, explains this situation as follows. He says, the findings lay bare the USA's systemic failure to educate all students equally. And we don't want our district to be a part of that systemic failure. When our children fail, we hurt. And so we want to offer our assistance as the board tries to find ways to overcome this situation. And I want to thank you all for this time, and I look forward to working with you all and making ways and making changes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now our discussion on the annual student behavior review. Dr. Lee, do I start with you?
I think we'll let Mr. Hillman start off.
Thank you.
Good evening, members of the board and Dr. Sullivan. My name is Brad Hillman. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Middle Schools, and on behalf of the Teaching and Learning Team, I would like to thank you for allowing us to come before you and present the annual Student Behavior Review. Joining me tonight to present our work is Dr. Lee, the Assistant Superintendent for High Schools, and Mrs. Johnson, the Assistant Superintendent for Elementary Schools. Additionally, we have invited some of our friends from 360 Youth Services to assist us in the presentation. We have Margot Smith, the Clinical Director, and we also have Matt Cassidy, a Program Coordinator. Later in the presentation, they will be explaining the wonderful work that they are doing with our students at the middle school level, and also providing an overview of some of the community services that they are providing when it comes to vaping issues. During our presentation tonight, we are happy to take your questions throughout the presentation, and we will also have a place at the end of the presentation for questions. As has been the case in several previous years, we continue to see the use of out-of-school suspension affecting a small percentage of our overall student population, approximately 1.1%. We truly believe that this is because we have great students and wonderfully supportive parents. Additionally, our school administrators and teachers are working diligently to create a positive and welcoming environment for all of our students. While we still continue to have work that we still need to do, our overall trend data continues to be positive, as we have just about 99% of our students not receiving an out-of-school suspension for the 17-18 school year. Tonight's purpose is to review our current interventions about trying to keep as many kids in class as humanly as possible. We also want to review the 17-18 out-of-school student data, and we're also going to have a vaping overview of what that entails and how it is that we are working with our students and our families to address that. And then we also are going to be talking about our 360 Youth Services that's being working with our high schools, but now is moving into the middle schools, and we're going to go over some of the referral data along with some of our success stories that have come out of that interaction.
So what we like to do first is really talk about how are we effectively providing support for our kids proactively so that, as Mr. Hillman talked about, we can keep kids in class, that we are making sure that students are not being disciplined for any types of decisions that are making, and we're promoting that positive choice. What we have on the screen here is really begins this multi-tiered system of support model, and that model is the practice where we provide high-quality instruction and interventions that are matched to student need. What we will do over these next couple of slides is outline some of the interventions that are used to promote positive decision-making by our students using this multi-tiered system of support as a lens. The interventions listed here are levels of support for all students, and so what you have at the top is the universal piece of it. One of the first level interventions talks about the positive behavior interventions and supports, more commonly known as PBIS. The PBIS model we know closely aligns with the MTSS model, the multi-tiered system of support. PBIS promotes good behavior, and it provides support for all of our students to continue with that positive behavior and culture and climate. One of the things that our superintendent has really talked about the past 2 years with our students and staff is really looking at how do we build relationships with individual students. And we know that goes a long way with that teacher-student connection, and that is some of the things that we continue to do not only with our students but with our parents, and really focusing on that. As the speaker talked about, looking at implicit bias and how do we go about making sure that implicit bias is not part of any type of our decisions. Really, our district equity leadership team, more commonly known as DELT, has really taken the lead in the past couple of years to help foster that type of training for all of our staff in the schools, so that what is occurring is not as a result of any biases that are definitely out there, and no decisions that are being made based upon those.
So, where are we with that training? I'm certain that you can't do 33 schools in a half a year, so where are we with this?
Yeah, so, the timeliness of this, we had, there was a recent change with the state that required this type of training for all of our staff, and so all of our staff have been, certified staff have been through that training. We continue now to extend that to other parts of our staff, including our first student bus drivers, our Airmark staff, and then it's now part of our new teacher induction training as well.
Okay, thank you.
The next slide talks about a more targeted approach in the MTSS model, and this really looks at how can we, for some of the students that are in need of extra supports and interventions, what are we doing for those students? And really, again, keeping with that kids in class philosophy, looking at alternative suspensions, things like community service on the weekends, where they're either have a Saturday option to work in Loaves and Fishes or to do some other types of community services. Restorative justice are things that we are actually actively doing in our schools. Restorative justice is an approach to school behavior that aims to address root causes of student behavioral choices. Restorative justice considers that when someone makes a poor behavioral choice that leads to an infraction, this infraction may cause harm to other students and staff, and it creates imbalance in what was otherwise a positive school environment. Restorative practice actually aimed to repair that harm caused by the decision and restore the school environment to its previous balance. Some of the other targeted systems of support that we're going to hear a little bit about later look at some of the infractions involving vaping. Vaping is something that is a particular infraction that we're seeing some trends in our schools, and again, we'll have some more information about that shortly.
So the other piece of MTSS and looking at that multi-tiered system of supports is making sure that what we're doing is working. So we've talked about some ways that we intervene with kids, but we also need to use that framework to look at student data to see if, at a student level, if what we're doing with a student is working for that particular child. Is the intervention working? Do we need more supports or less supports, different supports? We also want to look at a grade level or a group of students, and so we look at that. Is there a behavior that's increasing that we might need to address? And as Dr. Lee just shared, we saw an increase in behaviors this year in a behavior, the vaping behavior, which led to more out-of-school suspensions and discipline in general. And so there were supports brought in to help support students for that. And then finally, we have to look at that macro level. What are the trends that we see from year to year and amongst the different demographic groups? And then we not only look for those trends, but what's causing those trends? Can we hypothesize why the trend is happening? And then that continual analysis that we have helps us intervene appropriately. So you can see on the slide different levels that we look at, where we're talking in a district group, we're talking at a grade level group, we're talking at the student level to determine what changes need to happen in behavior. So as you remember, what we commonly refer to as SB 100, which is technically PA 99456, gives us two things that we would suspend for. We've become much more selective about what behaviors that we suspend for. The impetus for SB 100 is that idea of keeping kids in schools, and using these two frameworks and suspend students just for these behaviors really helps us do that. And in many cases, what you don't see in the data is in many cases we have greatly reduced the number of days that are given for a suspension. So while a student may have an out-of-school suspension for a threat to school safety, for example, where it might have been 5 days before, now it's 3 days. And so we've also done a lot of combinations of behaviors. So at an elementary level, we don't suspend for that many days, but we might do a little bit of in-school suspension and some out-of-school suspension. And that gives us some opportunity for students, one, to exit the school environment and just give some distance, but then it also gives us some opportunities to actually do some intervention while a student is in an in-school suspension. And the other piece that we've gotten really good about with SB 100 is really pulling parents into those discussions early on. And so while it's not required by SB 100 to have a parent reentry meeting, we have pretty consistently created those opportunities for parents, and that helps us partner with parents right from the very beginning and make changes to student behavior much quicker. So as Brad mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, about 1.1% of our students have received an out-of-school suspension. And when you think about our population overall, the national average is about 5% of students, and that's an average. So we are far below that national average. And you can see, as we would suspect, that suspensions are used much less at an elementary level, a little more at the middle school level, and then more at the high school level for larger, bigger behaviors that occur at high school level. What you see on this slide is the 6-year suspension data. So you see a nice gradual decline in suspension data at the elementary school. You'll also notice that from last year to this year, 23 to 19, we're starting to sort of plateau out in how many suspensions, how much decrease that we have from 6 years ago. So you can definitely see the impact of SB 100. Yes, sir.
Just looking at the hard numbers, and we do this also with the SATs and whatnot. We've got kids that are moving in and out of the district during this time period. So students can be leaving and entering, which would impact the numbers. And we're going to have students that are going to be progressing through the systems. They're going to leave elementary school. That's going to impact the raw presentation. We're not seeing any impact on the individual student over the course of their time here.
We are not. We are not looking at cohorts of students and seeing if the same set of students have learned behaviors over a period of time. We are simply looking at, in a school year, how many students have a suspension.
So, just to clarify, 'cause I remember asking this question before. We don't have a reflection, I didn't see it anywhere in the information, but we don't have an idea of how many students could potentially be repeat. We're just looking at the raw numbers. We don't have do we look at any students that have a continued?
We do look at, and within this year, I think that, for example, at elementary level, there are 5 students within that 19 who had more than one suspension. So we definitely do look at that. And again, that's looking at that data at a student level to make sure that we are intervening appropriately for that student and what might be creating those circumstances that are surrounding that. So within a year, we can see that. What we don't have is cohorts of data. So it's those 38 kids are a different set of kids than the 19.
Okay. Those, I would just ask that just consider maybe as we get the information in the future, just understanding how many students may have more than one that particular year, represent more than one, and that number might be helpful.
That's a good idea. Yeah. And then the other piece that we want to look at is why are students being suspended? So thinking again about those 2 diamonds from SB 100. At the elementary level, students are primarily suspended due to physical aggression. And I want to caution us to realize that this is elementary students. So physical aggression might just be a student being dysregulated, not able to control themselves, and lashing out at kids. It doesn't mean that we have students who are maliciously trying to hurt someone else. But we need to think about interventions for those students. And so primarily we work on self-regulation skills and really teaching kids how do they calm themselves down when something happens that they maybe don't like. As I mentioned before, we have parent reentry meetings that we have found to be very successful. We're also looking at check-in and check-out systems for students. So if a student has had several disciplinary activities, or even if we're just concerned about them, we might give them someone to check in with who isn't a part of their normal part of their day, that can just give them a cheerleading approach to the day, and then at the end of the day, how did you do? Did you meet your goal? Did you have a good day? And then really looking at problem solving and looking at from a whole team perspective about what are we doing for this particular student, and do the interventions match, and are they working, or do we need to change them?
On this slide, you see the 6-year suspension data at the middle school level, and you will notice that there is a decrease from last year to this year, but overall it still sticks within the overall trend. And as Ms. Johnson had pointed out, we are starting to see that plateau piece. And you see that when you also begin looking at individual groups of students. We do see a decrease in the number of suspensions associated with our African American students. But overall, we are seeing a relatively flat data mark between the 6 years. And I think that's because, again, we are hitting that point where we are really working very diligently to use other mechanisms besides out-of-school suspension in working with students when they have done something that is not appropriate for the school environment. And what does that look like? In the next slide, we see our 3 major infractions, and you'll see that vaping and tobacco have come up there, and that is one of the pieces that we'll address here in a little bit. But when it comes to any type of out-of-school suspension, our building principals, our assistant principals, our teachers are really working to try to meet with families and to try to have conversations around what caused the event to take place that was not school appropriate. And how is it that either A, the school can better assist in making that prevention, or B, how can we assist a student in being able to better process through their decision making. And some of those pieces at this age level were getting students who are starting to be able to understand some of their own things that are happening within their own life and that impact that is happening on them. And that is where the 360 Youth Referral has been valuable in the 3 pilot schools so far this year. And you'll hear more about that in a little bit. The other component that we have at the middle school level is that idea of the team support. And we are really working to make sure that all of our students have a point of contact, especially those students who may not have the same affinity for school as maybe other students, but how do we get them to have a person that they can touch base with, that they can feel is wanting them there and is looking forward to meeting with them and seeing them be successful. So many of our buildings have assigned individuals that kind of an on-the-hip person that they touch base with a student 3 or 4 times throughout the day to make sure that things are going smoothly as a means of helping them through their day. And then finally, when we do have an out-of-school suspension, we are often trying to couple that with an in-school suspension, not because we want them out of class longer, but after the out-of-school suspension comes back, how do we reintroduce them back into the environment that they were struggling or had a struggle with? And how do we make sure that they are prepared to deal with peers who ask them questions? How do we make sure that we work with them to be able to get homework caught up on if there was homework that was missed during that time? And then also be able to introduce them to other people that they may not know in the school environment who would be wonderful resources for them. A social worker, a counselor, a psychologist, or maybe even a teacher that they had never thought of making contact with because they had them in 6th grade, and now that they're in 8th grade, they didn't think that they would be able to go back and have that type of conversation with them. So that is definitely some of the things that we're working on as a way to try to prevent the use of out-of-school suspension, but also trying to make sure that the behaviors that we're seeing are disappearing as well.
Can I just,
Yes.
Kevin, have you clarify something for me really quick.
Yes.
And I guess this, Brad, maybe a question for you or Lewis, because it doesn't really apply as much to Laura, but the reckless conduct, I'm trying to get a grasp of what the heck that means, because it seems like everything my mind says what reckless conduct is, we identified in discipline report as something else. So, and I noticed in middle school, while it can only range from a half day to a 3-day out of school suspension, in high school it can range from a half day to 10 days out of school suspension. Can you just give me a brief snapshot of what reckless conduct is?
Not a problem. At the middle school level, we use it for a variety of different things, from a technology violation or to an action that a middle school student we think could have predicted would have caused another student harm. So even though the action may not have actually caused a person harm, it was only because it was just a very fortunate aspect that happened in that situation that didn't allow someone to be caused harm. So it's kind of that reckless piece. Another part is that we may have a student who is in a heightened emotional state, and we just cannot get them to settle. Very similar to the elementary reason for a suspension is that somebody just needs a break, time away. And then finally, another one that is there is that sometimes we do have physical injury that happens to a student, even though it's not the result of a fight, but rather, again, to that lack of forethought and being able to predict that the thing that I'm about to do could negatively impact somebody, and they just didn't think of it in that particular way. So that's how we kind of use the reckless conduct. I did go through and look at the reckless conduct pieces for all of our suspensions, and that's kind of a synopsis of those without getting into specific events.
And I would just tag on to everything that Brad said. At the high school, it's going to be it can be an intentional threat that we know has greatly now affected the entire community. And also, keep in mind that some of these infractions, most of them are coupled with other fractions as well that are just as egregious, if not sometimes more.
So if someone is caught vaping, is it an automatic suspension, or is there? Yeah.
Well, if you're talking about the high school level, we're going to
middle
talk about
school
that in
too.
a little bit.
Yeah.
So I'll reserve my comment just till we get to the high school.
The middle school, we do not have an automatic. That would be a pre-programmed consequence for an action, and we try to take each action that a student does that we're not happy with, and we try to factor in all of the underlying circumstances that go into that before we make our decision. And I don't believe that we have, for just simple vaping in class or the use of tobacco, done suspension at the middle school level. Generally, when you see suspension at the middle school level associated with vaping or tobacco, there is something else associated with that. Generally.
So at the high school level, we see a similar staircase decline in total suspensions over the past 6 years. This current year, though, we did see a rise in total number of suspensions. This increase represents 0.6% increase from last year's data that we presented to you. This increase displays that 2.5% of all of our students at the high school level have experienced at least one out-of-school suspension. It's based on the student enrollment at the high school of over 9,000 students. We have seen an increase in vaping incidents at the high school level, as we've talked about. This type of behavior has led to an increase in specific tobacco infractions. This is what we would term a Tier 2, 3 infraction, which could indicate either an in-school suspension as an outcome or possible out-of-school. Some of the reasons that we are actually using the out-of-school feature would be when it's a specific disruption to other students' learning environment on multiple occasions. So it's not just one time the student was caught vaping, but maybe 3, 4 times, maybe specific sales that are occurring. Students specifically may be actually vaping in a public area with other students and staff present. So those are some of the specific reasons why it may rise to a Tier 3 incident where it's more egregious, where it's not a first time, it's not a second time, it's not an automatic that we have to it, but the behavior continues not to change and becomes actually more of a safety piece to the entire school community. The remaining graphs that are listed up there show a breakdown by ethnicity, race. We continue to review interventions that are targeted towards all of our students to ensure we provide appropriate levels of support to encourage positive student choices, so that we're making sure that as we address disproportionate data that lists up there specifically in our African American students, we want to make sure that those infractions are being treated specifically for what they are. Specifically with our African American students, while you see that there was a one student increase, the overall comparison to other demographic groups did experience a 10% drop this year as compared to last year's data. We know that we still have a lot of work to do in that area, but we'll continue to try to build upon some of the interventions that are in place.
Before you move on, so I'm seeing, I hear a little bit different approach for the vaping, for example, and from middle to high school. And you're saying as far as for suspensions at the high school, even there's a degree of gray that you make a decision. So, with restorative justice, the approach is still you're holding the students accountable for their behavior. And I think that's an important piece to any kind of discipline program. But as we try to, correct our implicit bias, there is that area where you can go overboard, and then you're allowing some behaviors to occur without any kind of discipline having been incurred. So do you see that as a possible reason why we might be seeing an increase at the high school level too?
I think that's a great question. In looking at this, I think as always, there are many pieces to the puzzle for this. I think if we're just looking at specific raw numbers of infractions, what we noticed first was the increase in tobacco and vaping infractions. And also, some of those vaping infractions, as we'll learn a little bit, were also resulting in the use of some of the devices containing THC, which is found in cannabis. So for those same infractions, the drug piece is more egregious, so they were coded as such, but some of those vaping devices also included that. So I think, as we, as administrators in the buildings, digest these numbers, as Laura talked about in that the MTSS model and how we evaluate things, I think trying to break down what this means and looking, is there a specific trend that we're seeing? We know the vaping is, but with the number there, it could be a variety of that, hey, this was a year where we had unfortunately, some students just made some poor decisions, choices. Not, I think keeping within that 2.5% is still a low number, but it's still a number that we always want to make sure that we're doing the best that we can. So I hope that answers it, but I think we're trying to figure out not to conclude too much from the data, making sure that we're still maintaining what we always do, regardless of what the numbers will actually say.
Right. I guess, and you have answered it. I think we just have to be very careful that, because if we create an atmosphere, well, I can get away with this because I've gotten away with it before, then we're going to end up seeing higher and higher degrees of risk taking place. So I just want to be sure we're looking at that too, not just at lowering the numbers, but we have to have a safe school, and our kids have to be held accountable when they do have infractions.
Yeah, and I think the next slide sort of shows, at least at the high school level, some of the incidents, behaviors, and when you look at those are the reasons why if a student is being externally suspended, we want to make sure that we have, as you talked about, a safe school. As you look at some of those, they're very straightforward. The gross insubordination, I think, is important to, let's first talk about what it's not. It's not students who are using profanity and vulgar language. It's not a student who is maybe yelling or raising their voice or actually even being disrespectful toward a staff member or a teacher, and to some extent not even refusing to follow directions. The escalation to what would be considered gross insubordination is when a directive is given by the dean, by a staff member that will result in a forecast threat versus against the school safety piece of it, injury, some type of disruption, or interference with school activities. So for example, if potentially a dean, if someone is trying to defuse a fight and a student, or a fight from occurring, and a student has been willfully told you need to remove yourself, who is not even a part of that situation, and they refuse, and they contribute toward that escalation between those two people, where now it can definitely escalate itself to where we now have 3 or more people that could potentially lead to some type of physical aggression. That would be considered gross insubordination, because that student now has inserted themselves into a situation that normally could have been diffused without their input.
So, well, I'm going to ask another question really quick. Or no, I'll save it for the end. Go ahead.
Yeah,
All right.
I'm gonna save
I think at this time we'd like to transition here a little bit to a little bit about what we've talked about with vaping, and want to thank Matt Cassidy and Margot Smith, both from 360 Youth Services. We also want to take time to thank their chief director who's here tonight and their board directors here in support of this presentation. And I'm going to turn over to Matt, who's going to inform us a little bit about vaping, and then Margot to talk a little bit about the middle school pilot.
Good evening, everyone. As you just heard, my name is Matt Cassidy, and I'm the project coordinator with the Community Alliance for Prevention and 360 Youth Services. And to start things off, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight to provide a little background information about vaping and e-cigarettes. As you can see from the title slide, vaping and e-cigarettes are 2 terms that get thrown around. I'm going to use them interchangeably this evening. So when I say one, it really could be either one. So I don't want anybody to be confused about what's vaping and what's e-cigarettes. They're both to be used the same way. And before we really begin, I also want to just emphasize that vaping and e-cigarettes is an emerging trend, both nationwide and in our local community. And because of that, it's constantly evolving. The science that's coming out around it, the information that's coming around is coming out continuously. So part of our effort in providing this presentation tonight is to give a snapshot of where we're at now, but know that we're always looking to move forward and continuing to evolve with the information that's coming forward. So tonight I want to provide a little background about how e-cigarettes work, the history of their emergence, what is actually in e-cigarette products, some of the perceptions and concerns that come along with vape products, and some of the responses that we see to these trends. As we move along, and there's a lot of material, and it can be dense in different places, so please feel free to jump in with questions at any time. So the first thing I wanted to show is essentially just a diagram of a run-of-the-mill vape device. And you'll see at the top, it says ENDS. And that's a specific term that is an acronym for Electronic Nicotine Delivery System. So all the vape devices and e-cigarettes all fall under this category of ENDS. And these are battery-powered heating devices that create an aerosol that users inhale. So when we look at this diagram, we kind of see all of the parts that you would see in any type of product. They don't all look like this, as we'll see in a moment, but they all kind of function in this way. Now, a lot of people get confused right out of the gate because we think about combustible tobacco when we look at tobacco products. So the end where we actually see some smoke is not the end that you would see in combustible where people would light it and be smoke coming out. That's actually the mouthpiece where people would be breathing in the water vapor or aerosol. So at the top we have the LED lights, which is powered by the battery. It tends to activate when a user inhales to show that it's in use. We have a microprocessor. Then you see the atomizer, which is crucial in terms of how the atomizer diffuses the nicotine liquid from the cartridge, which is towards the top. And that cartridge is what is full of all the ingredients that are part of vape products. Well, we use the term e-juice. And so all of this apparatus works together to create a vape device or an ENDS device. We don't see pictured on this particular image, but they're all different. And one thing that we see on some of the other devices is actually a switch that will moderate the nicotine levels that are being used. So we'll spend a little time talking about that in a moment.
On this slide, you'll see some of the traditional devices. There's a lineup of some of the different products that are out there that can be known as vapes, vaporizers, vape pens, hookah pens, e-cigarettes or e-cigs, and a lot of other slang terms that are out there. A lot of times people won't call them any of those terms, and they'll actually just use some of the brand names such as Juul, Blue, and Halo, or Enjoy. Juul is a particularly popular brand that we see out in the community now and both nationwide. It's growing a market trend, and we're seeing it most commonly. When you look at all these devices up here, you'll see some that look like traditional tobacco products. You have a pipe, you have a cigar, you have something that looks like a cigarette, and those tend to be older iterations of vape products. As the vape products have continued to grow and evolve, we're seeing more engineers and design come in to streamline them and help them look a little more unique and look a little more sleek in design and a little more inconspicuous so people can use them without having the same level of attention.
The ones, and I hope staff and administration are aware of this, the ones I hear from my daughter, the ones that kids are using now more than ever in the schools, basically look like a flash drive.
Yes.
So you would never know. The kids put it up to their mouth. I've seen Snapchat videos of this, and the kids blowing out smoke in the classroom, and nobody ever clues in because it doesn't smell like traditional tobacco smoke, and it's the water vapor essentially. So, that even now your flash drives look like a vaping device. So I'd throw that out there. You might want to put that picture up there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so as they're evolving, some of them are pens that can actually be used. So it looks like a typical writing device. It can be the Juul device, which can be plugged in as a jump drive in your computer to be charged. And you're absolutely right. People can use them discreetly. People can have them in a sleeve of a hooded sweatshirt and inhale on one side and exhale throughout the other so that it doesn't even get out there. And because it is an aerosol, it can be odorless, which makes it a lot more difficult to detect, which is difficult for parents, adults, teachers, school systems to be able to recognize it when it's happening. Now, the actual first e-cigarette came about in 1963, but it didn't become popular. That's why we haven't been talking about this for decades like we have with traditional tobacco products. The modern vaping devices started to come about really in the mid-2000s. And they were originally marketed as a smoking cessation tool. So they weren't marketed as another device to be using nicotine. They were actually created under the marketing guise of getting people to wean off of using tobacco products. Unfortunately, that's just not the way the trend has continued. We do not see it being used as a smoking cessation tool very frequently. As a matter of fact, we've seen an increasing trend of dual tobacco use. So people who are using vape or e-cigarette devices when they're in public in places where there are stipulations around using traditional tobacco products and using traditional tobacco products at home. Big tobacco companies, brands like R.J. Reynolds, Philip Morris, Lorelax, originally were opposed to this emerging market. But as they saw the amount of money coming into them, and as it became a billion-dollar industry, that attitude soon changed. And so they started to design some of their own brand names or acquiring some of the existing products that were out there. Like I said, it's a billion-dollar industry, and new products are coming out of the market on a daily basis. Some of them that are more obvious and some of them are less noticeable. And as you mentioned, Juul is one of the biggest out there.
So I always thought that there was a lot of smoke that came out of them. You're saying that some of these don't have a lot of visible output?
Oh, this?
It depends on how the user uses it. Much like somebody uses a traditional tobacco, it depends on how much they inhale and exhale. So it can really be hidden if that's their desire. It really depends on how a user inhales, how much they tend to inhale.
Yes. Yeah, it's definitely noticeable.
I mean, every time I've seen someone, it's like a cloud, like
Yeah,
a huge cloud, and I'm like, how do you hide that?
It can look like a bigger cloud than a cigarette, but the thing with it too is that, like you said, they can discreetly blow it through their sweatshirt, and there's no odor to it. That's the big thing.
Yeah, and there's a culture around vape devices, so there are people who actually will make every effort to draw every attention to themselves when they're using a device, and so they will have larger vape clouds. It really just depends on the individual user. Bless you. So as we're looking at this, we're trying to get more information, more education about what is actually in these e-cigarettes. And scientific studies have identified hundreds of chemicals that are in the vapor of the mainstream smoke. Mainstream is the person who's actively using, who's inhaling, putting their mouth on device. But it's not only, some of the danger and some of those chemicals are not only through mainstream smoke, they're also found through the secondhand, or what is also known as side stream smoke. So we see many of these chemicals that are harmful to the body. Many of the chemicals that we see in traditional tobacco can also be found in e-cigarettes, things like formaldehyde, acrolein, nickel, chromium, lead, chemicals, heavy metals that we know are not helpful for our bodies, that can be harmful. But I wanted to pull together a small list of just a couple of the chemicals and what they actually can do to the body. Most of the chemicals that we see listed on this page tend to irritate soft tissues. Soft tissues are connective tissues, surrounding tissues, structural tissues that help support things in the body. And so if you think about when somebody's using a vape product, it tends to be around the face. And so the things that are most impacted are the lungs, the mouth, the eyes, and the nose. So one of those things is propylene glycol. This is one of the main ingredients, and it's a syrupy liquid that actually keeps everything fresh within the e-cartridge and the e-juice. And so this is linked to a lot of the soft tissue damage that we're talking about, specifically in the lung, throat, and eye. And this irritation that comes can also take the form of swelling and all kinds of other irritation that could be difficult for people or users to deal with. We also have diacetyl, which has been linked to irreversible lung disease that's been referred to as popcorn lung. And popcorn lung is essentially a narrowing of the airways in the lungs where people can't take in as much oxygen. And diacetyl is the number one factor behind this. It's called popcorn lung actually because it was first found in a factory where people were mixing ingredients for popcorn. Diacetyl has a buttery taste, and when they were mixing the ingredients, they found there were a disproportionate number of factory workers in this one area who were becoming sick with this illness. It's not a problem if it's ingested in a normal form, but if it's smoked or if it comes ingested through aerosol, it can become dangerous to the body. We also have glycerol, which can create headaches, dizziness, bloating, nausea, vegetable glycerin, which is linked to organ damage, benzoic acid, which degrades the central nervous system, which is your spine and your brain, so it really starts to impact the coordination of the body. And then the one that people don't really spend enough time thinking about, which is nicotine. Nicotine is that active ingredient that causes people for decades and decades to be hooked with traditional tobacco products. And when people think of e-cigarettes and vaping products, they don't think of it being addictive in that same way. But nicotine is one of the main ingredients that we find in the e-juices, and it's a highly addictive chemical that changes the way synapses form in the brain. It increases the risk of cardiovascular and respiratory illness, and it can decrease the system function. And what's most alarming for us and the people in this room is so we're so focused on youth, and all of these chemicals have an outsized impact on our youth because their brains are still developing. They're still developing, they haven't hit that 25 to 26-year-old range. So these chemicals will actually impact them larger than they would an adult who is using. So let's take a look at some of the perceptions and concerns that come along with it. And the one that I hear the most often is everybody's doing it. And of course, this perception has been around for forever with many substance use, with traditional tobacco, with alcohol. And essentially, data is just not bearing this out. Specifically, data in our area through the IASB, which was taken in 2016, shows that the vast majority of our students are not using e-cigarettes or any other substance for that matter. The vast majority of our students are making healthy decisions, which is fantastic and something that should be lauded in our community. Now, 2016 was a little bit before some of this trend started to emerge in a little bit greater detail. And thankfully, we will get to see new data here in 2018. The IAS was taken in the winter and the spring, so we should have new data hopefully in late summer, early fall that will provide a little more information about it. And the people who run IAS wanted to provide a little more context around this particular trend. So they added some new questions that will also ask about frequency of use, risk of harm from using this product. Risk of harm is an incredibly important data point to track with any substance use, and also access to vaping products. So as we move into the new school year, we'll have a little more information about what's going on in our communities. I also want to talk about the fact that people say that vaping products are safer than conventional cigarettes. When I go and do presentations in classrooms or with parents, I hear all the time this kind of false premise. Well, which should I prefer? That my student or I is using traditional tobacco, is smoking a cigarette, or is using vaping products? And the truth is, I would say neither. It's not an either-or conversation. We're not mandating that people use one product or the other. Neither is helpful. We have research for decades that shows that traditional tobacco is harmful, and we know that many of the same ingredients are found in e-cigarettes. And as studies and science continues to develop, we are very confident that all these chemicals are going to have the same impact with e-cigarettes and vaping products. We also see that a lot of students feel that they're less scared or less concerned to try e-cigarettes because we don't have smoke. It's just water vapor, this aerosol. But as we know, aerosol is not a healthy thing to be breathing into your lungs. There can be harmful aerosols. So just because something is called aerosol or termed water vapor, it doesn't mean it's healthy for our bodies. We're also seeing some correlations with other use. So teens who start with e-cigarettes tend to be 7 times more likely to smoke traditional cigarettes. That's obviously a trend we do not want to see continue. We've seen traditional tobacco rates decrease for about 20 years, and that's fantastic. What we do not want to see is the trend continue with vaping cigarettes for people starting with vaping and moving to more e-cigarette use. And we also know that when people are using vaping devices, they can actually be ingesting more nicotine into their system, because when somebody uses a traditional cigarette, there's a very finite length of that cigarette. They smoke the cigarette, they're done, and they move on. When people are vaping, they tend to not be taking just a quick vaping break outside or someplace else. They tend to just kind of absently-minded be using over and over and over. So there's not the same natural endpoint to when somebody's using a vaping device. We also see that e-cigarette use is correlated with other substance use. Most specifically, those e-juices, those cartridges that we mentioned at the beginning, can be changed. They can be moved. They can be filled with other products. And so people can create their own e-juice. And most specifically, they're often used for different cannabis products. Cannabis oils can be substituted that can be high in THC content or CBD oil content that can have significant impacts in a different way. So when people are using a vape device, it can be used for tobacco, nicotine products, but also cannabis products, which can be really harmful. So what can we do, and what is happening with these vaping products? When we look for guidance on these kinds of things, we tend to turn to the FDA. That's who really looks at regulating these products. And in May 2016, the FDA finalized a rule extending authority on all e-cigarette products. And so they really looked at specifically legal age restrictions, health warnings on packaging, and manufacturing regulations. But they did not extend their full use of their powers to e-cigarette products and vaping products. So they allowed them to have the opportunity to follow some of the same patterns and trends that traditional tobacco used for many, many years. In 1971, traditional tobacco was banned from using a lot of advertising methods that were very helpful to them, things like TV and radio, because they had been found to be marketing to youth. Those practices are not banned for vaping and e-cigarettes. So we see a lot of the same playbook. We see celebrity endorsements. We see TV ads. And another thing that people don't think about is product flavorings. We used to see flavored tobaccos, and we don't really see that anymore. However, if you just do a cursory Google search of the different e-juices that you could buy for your vaping device, you can find things like creme brulee, mango, fruit medley, coffee, lemon tart, peppermint, blue raz lemonade, things that harken anything other than a nicotine-based product. So we're seeing some of these things that are marketed towards youth. And a lot of the marketing is really intelligent because it happens in social media platforms and digital marketing. We know social media is a place where a lot of our youth are very vulnerable. It's an outlet they spend a lot of time on, and that's where we're seeing a lot of emphasis from these products. So they're seeing a lot more marketing there than they would in some of the other outlets. So this regulation, even though they've been slow to regulate, this has caused some frustration by a lot of the communities who are concerned about the dangers and the health concerns that come with it, and a lot of medical groups have actually sued the FDA for not moving quickly on these products. Organizations such as the American Cancer Society, the American Heart Association, the American Lung Association, and the American Academy of Pediatrics. So we might see some movement moving quicker forward with that. But there are other ways that organizations and states and local governments are looking to jump in and perhaps protect young people. So both Naperville and Aurora have passed Tobacco 21 ordinances, which ban the sale of tobacco products to anybody under the age of 21 within city limits. And while originally this looked at, when the original law went into place, it was focused on just traditional tobacco products. After a year waiting period, it also included hookah, water pipe, and e-cigarettes. The state has looked at diving into this pool as well. Both the Illinois House and Senate have passed a Tobacco 21 bill, and it's sitting at the governor's desk that is looking to, again, prohibit the sale to people under the age of 21 of tobacco products, including e-cigarettes and vaping devices. So we are seeing some regulation. And what is really encouraging is we're seeing a lot of interest and awareness and people wanting to get education on these devices, because education is really our key to helping ensure that our youth are still continuing to make those healthy decisions that we know that they're doing. It's a lot of information. Any questions, thoughts?
We've prohibited e-cigarettes from use in our schools, but they're being used in our schools. How can you help us?
It's a great question. So I know that there are specific efforts that are being done in the school, and I will, allow everybody here at the table to answer questions in that. But like I said, really education is what we really want to focus on. Messaging, providing prevention messages and information, allowing or helping students to be aware that there are dangers, that it isn't something that people can do without concern. A lot of the marketing that went out when vaping devices became popular was smoking without the guilt, or smoking without the concern, and that's just simply not the case. So what finally turned the tide for traditional tobacco was this education and awareness about the harms that came with it. I'm quite confident the same thing will happen with vaping and e-cigarettes. So right now we're kind of getting out the ground game of trying to get that message out there, and it's just getting that message out to the saturation point.
Thank you.
So are we, from a standpoint of a strategy with our community, are we looking at some type of strategy for next year, just trying to share this information? Because I had no idea some of these aspects, and I think there were a lot of parents that probably don't.
Yes, to your question, I think the education piece is the biggest thing we're trying to get out to the community. This past year, we have spent time with our parent community, both at the middle school level and at the high school level, in holding presentations. We actually worked with 203 on this initiative because they are seeing the exact same trend, and we came together and hosted a joint parent night that was held in 1 week in our district and 1 week in their district, but parents from both districts could attend either one. And then most recently, Matt actually spoke in front of the Naperville Liquor Commission. They were asking, what they could do to help support our efforts in the schools. And some of the law enforcement there talked about different operations they're doing in terms of their increased focus. So I think, we're trying to do everything we can from a proactive standpoint to get the education out there that these are not good for our kids. And I think as Matt talked about, the education with tobacco has taken decades for us to get that message out. We hope this doesn't take that long, but I think this is the first kind of piece in what we can do. And really just partner with parents so that they have a great understanding of this.
And then for our students, is this health class, these conversations taking place, or?
They are. They've always continued to take place in those classes. I think, this is a topic, at least I think at both levels, all three levels, well, both levels, not the elementaries. But I always tell Laura, maybe fifth graders, but not at the elementary level, that, we're still trying to take a look at, what can we do to get this out. I think the more we hear about in the community and on the national basis, it's going to help our teachers because our students are very slick in how they're doing this, and they will help them to empower them a little bit more to look for those different things. The devices, really, there's mouse pads. They just continue to change. So we're trying everything we can to really get this message out.
I have a question, kind of a follow-up to Susan's. With the educational piece for the parents, what was the turnout on those events?
I think in our district, I want to say roughly, what do we have, maybe 30 to 40?
I think it was about 45.
Yeah, and speaking with 203, they had about the same amount. But again, and then at the middle schools, we had a number of presentations.
At some of the presentations, the turnout was under 20 as far as the number of parents who attended. We do try to advertise and put them on evenings where we don't put parents in a situation where they have to choose between attending an elementary concert or a middle school vaping presentation, but we do try to advertise those, but the attendance was not large. And that's one of the other reasons that we wanted to bring this presentation here as part of the discipline conversation, is so that way you all were aware of it, and it's another avenue or venue for people to be able to learn and experience and understand what's happening.
Because I've learned more in this presentation, in this conversation, than I've all night, or even some previous meetings, no offense. But this, I mean, I knew a little bit about it, but then I realized how little I knew about it because of this presentation.
So I happen to know a lot about it. And it's been going on in our schools for 5 years or more. In fact, I know parents who are clueless that their kids are smoking cannabis in their own house through a water vapor device, and they've got no idea. And their kids are essentially smoking marijuana every day in their own house, and the parents have no clue. Parents are very aware of it, and I hear from a lot of parents, middle school parents, high school parents. It's happening on the bus, it's happening in the bathrooms, it's happening in the classrooms. My concern is we know it's happening, we know it's a growing trend, we see more kids are doing it, but I only see 150 in-school suspensions and 18 out-of-school suspensions, and there's 180 days in the calendar year. And that's less than one a day. And I gotta imagine it's happening more than one a day. So are we not good at monitoring it? Are we turning a blind eye to it? Or, you know, I guess I'm trying to figure out what we can do to get.
Mark, we can't
better.
out of school suspend kids for one incident. It doesn't meet the requirements of SB 100.
Okay, so the 150 in-school suspensions, and I think 121 of those were one-day suspensions. I'm assuming the longer suspensions or out of suspensions were for either more serious things like what Brad was alluding to, or for second offenses or something like that. That's what I'm assuming it was.
Right.
So, you know, I guess I'm with Lori. I mean, I think, you know, it's disappointing to hear when you have a low turnout, you know, on things like this, when 360 comes out to the schools. But I'm willing to bet majority of parents still don't know what's going on. And in cases like that, you have to make information available during an open house. I mean, okay, it's, you know, hey, we've got this information for you here. Chances are parents are going to grab it. You know, I mean, you don't have to sit and give them a 15-minute lecture on are your kids vaping. But it's almost one of those things that you have to force them to get the information versus, will you please come to a presentation? Well, no one's got time for that. You know, everybody's got stuff going on at night. So, you know, I know, I think maybe you get a little unique in the way we try to educate.
Okay, I'd like them to move on through this, and there's still be some time. No, there's no problem. Time for questions then, too.
This time we're going to turn over to Margot.
Thank you for having me back again this year. I'm very excited to give you a quick update on the middle schools. Hopefully my mic will work. I thought we cut some of these out. I'm going to fast forward to the ones that I'd planned on. So just wanted to emphasize some of the differences from the high school, if you remember the presentation last year. So we piloted in 3 middle schools this year. And we quickly learned that the environment, the schools are very different than the high schools. So we're working with different staff within those buildings and getting referrals from different, mostly administrators. So we're working really closely with the principal, the assistant principals, and other people listed. The screening and assessments are pretty similar, but individually our plans with the students have to change due to just the age of the students. So due to their developmental level, we did increase the minimum amount of sessions per student. So with the high school, we were shooting for a goal of 4, and with the middle school population, we started with a minimum of 7 sessions per student. We also did the best we could to improve parent involvement compared to the high school age youth. So we worked really closely with the admin in the buildings to arranged that our staff could meet with parents at schools when they were having these school meetings where they were inviting parents in to talk about discipline. We did some really great handoff work where the staff was able to meet the parent at those meetings and really hear about how the services could be helpful and things like that. Because we did encounter some issues with parents not wanting to engage in the services, which we anticipated. But it seemed like due to the children being a little bit younger, parents were a little bit more shy of the services than with the older kids in the high school. So on a total, at the 3 middle schools 1 day a week, we served 29 youth individually this year. Only 4 of those youth were coded as alternative to suspension kids, although I have a hunch that there was a couple more that maybe just were referred for social emotional issues, but we did serve a suspension first. So if we break that down a little bit further, those are the reasons for the specifically. And when we say social emotional, really the top 3 things we're talking about are kids identified with anxiety that's interfering in their school day, depression symptoms, and then family stress. So the referring party recognized there's a lot going on in the home and wanting to help that student learn some tools to be able to still thrive in their school day. Most of the kids referred were from the 8th grade class, followed by 7th grade. On average, they received 9 sessions of support per student, and we completed a total of 260 individual sessions over the pilot year. So these outcomes are based solely on the assessments and questionnaires we completed with the students. And on those evidence-based tools, 76% of the students served demonstrated positive change after our services. I also asked all of the referring parties to kind of keep tabs on the kids all year and report on us changes that they're observing, so more just anecdotal data. Because I was curious to track how these assessments and questionnaires were working with the younger population and if they were understanding them as much as the high school kids were. And what, so 29 kids, so negative change 8% was really about 3 or 4 kids. But when I tracked those kids specifically, looking at staff referral, like their own personal outcome data that they tracked, all of those kids, the staff reported that they did actually see positive changes. So the staff did a really great job giving us a lot of information per kid about just watching them handle peer conflicts differently, that they're coming into the student service area less often, they're able to stay in class and not need to go see their counselor and things like that. So they were able to give us a lot of data to support the help of the outcomes of these services, which was great. I wanted to include one of our fantastic principals was able to quickly give me just a quick testimonial. So I'll read that for you. School-based services from 360 helped us to provide needed services to kids that we would have been unable to provide without our collaborative partnership. When I think about our most chronic and severe behavioral incidents in schools, most stem from students' inabilities to manage their emotions in a productive manner. Throughout this school year, I observed students who are receiving school-based services from 360, learning skills and tools to effectively manage their emotions so they could better attend to learning.
As a former principal, I think that's important. Because if one assumes that one consequence or a suspension will change behavior, that would be a tremendous error in judgment. And oftentimes we see repeats of behavior just because there's more to deal with. And this relationship with 360 that's ongoing and gives students an opportunity to work through some of the issues that may be sidelights from on the edge, but cause of the behavior in reality is really important. So this partnership is critical to behavioral change in my mind. I think sometimes we get lost. If we just punish somebody, they'll change. I spent 21 years and my gray hair says no.
We strongly believe kids are doing the best they can. So if they're not, then they need something else. They need skills and support. They want to do better if they can. So the community is very fortunate that you all feel the same way about the partnership and these services and are really giving students who wouldn't be able to access these types of services outside of school a way to do that. any other questions?
No, I have it at the end, but.
Okay.
So where do we go from here? One of the things we're looking to do is to expand the 360 youth services into all the middle schools for next year. We had a conversation with the building principals, the 3 pilots, building principals, asking if this would be something that should be incorporated into the other 4 middle schools, and it was a unanimous positive response. So much so that we had conversations about, well, if this is a cost, how do we make this happen if there's something that we would have to give up? And they were very much about having to explore that. So we were very thankful that that is not going to have to happen. Thank you to the support of IPF. So we're very happy about that. And we are very much looking forward to this being in all 7 schools for next year, which then helps us continue to focus on building positive relationships with all students. We know that that is a continued effort that needs to take place in all of our schools with all of our staff members, trying to make sure that every single student belongs. When a student belongs, we know that they have a greater want to be a positive member of that particular school, and that is what we're all about, is trying to improve that. And to assist us with that, we're looking at the implementation of Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning Plan, which is Captial, and we're going to be working through that over the next couple of years to make sure that we have that rolled out in a very productive fashion that will assist all of our students. And as always, we are looking to make sure that we are partnering with our parents to the best of our abilities, and understanding that not every parent views everything that we do in the exact same fashion, and how do we meet them where they're at, to be able to make sure that they feel welcome in our buildings and they understand what it is that we really are trying to do to assist their students. And with that, questions?
So I have one, and I'm just wondering in future focus, there's a lot of adult attention and effort being done to change student behavior, and quite clearly we have to take the onus of the responsibility. But I wonder if we need to increase our partnership with students. That means go beyond just trying to build a relationship with them, and especially in the middle schools, and really especially in the high schools. I'm talking them like a partnership, like they're part of the plan to change behavior. And I don't know, should we be including students in a climate committee? I'm sure they have them in the schools, and include them, and even include some of these students who received the consequence for, ill-advised behavior way after the fact, not 2 days after they got the suspension, because they're still not quite ready maybe to come back, but after the fact, to include them in this. And I think sometimes their inclusion, maybe we have them platformed or plateaued out. Maybe if we include them more or ask them their opinion, that might help. And I don't know if we're doing it or not, but I'm kind of interested in that.
I agree. I think there's a lot that, for the sake of the presentation, the time here, we did not get specifically about. Some of those things include, there's a mandatory reentry meeting for any time a student's externally suspended with the parent and the student. Some of our in-school suspension rooms are continually working on behavior activities, so that if you were to walk in our in-school suspension room, if a student was in there for anger management, that they're working exactly on some techniques regarding that, in addition to their academic coursework. So
I know we're doing that, but I'm saying outside of that, because they're in the midst of a behavioral intervention at that time. I'm talking about students when they're not, we take them out of class, or we do something after school and say, talk to us about our environment. How could we be doing better? I'm just thinking out of the box.
Well, I think it goes back to what Kathy was saying earlier, is that Kathy's fear or worry with some of the Senate Bill 100 thing is that maybe the kids aren't worried about the punishment as much because they know that they're going to be put on some type of remedial track or whatever the case may be. But I think when you partner with the students, you can help explain to them, listen, this is how it's disruptive. Not only disruptive for you and your studies, but it's disruptive for other people, and this is the reason why. And you know, the kids probably realize that, but it doesn't hurt that reinforcement and that partnership like you're talking about, because I think when you have a partnership with the students, maybe they understand what the heck reckless conduct and gross insubordination means, because I still don't know what those mean. So, you know, maybe the students don't either. But I noticed the majority of our suspensions are reckless actions or gross insubordination. So, I don't know, I think it comes down to education for students too.
Yeah, I think we can't lose sight of the fact that it's 1.1% of our students are in that category, and that is incredible. A small number of students. So we have over 98% of our students are actually not doing these things in our schools, and I think we have a lot of role models out there that are doing the right thing. I mean, the 360 has the positive campaign too that tell our students constantly most kids are not doing these risky behaviors. So we have a lot going on. Whether we could do more, my gosh, we all went to the awards for seniors. We have future presidents coming out of our schools. I'm sure we could find a few more mentors in our students to do positive work.
Point well
Kathy?
taken.
I think you're right. From the, you know, when we definitely look overall, we certainly had the acknowledgement of looking at our students of color and ensuring that we, as well along the national lines, but looking at within our schools and ensuring that, you know, that implicit bias are what other factors may contribute to some of those higher percentages along, you know, our students of color lines. I appreciate that continued look there. And looking at, you had provided the information as far as looking at students with repeat instances, and, you know, our elementary and our high school students, we have a quarter of those, a little less, it's 17% at the middle school, but some of those repeat infractions. So I'm not sure what strategies we can look at to try and help reduce, certainly working with parents, and I know that you're looking at it, but I don't know if there are other, if you see those things from a 360 standpoint as well, and working with other students, repeat students having the same challenges more than one time. But that's a concern where it's a quarter of our students for high school and elementary school levels.
If I can piggyback on that real quick, because I was kind of thinking along that same lines too. If there's repeat offenders, those are the ones that are being identified and kind of targeted to 360, or help me understand that again.
Now, Fargo, feel free to jump in, but at the high school, I believe the middle school, it's both. You know, the referrals are made on a proactive piece. You know, if a dean or a counselor or, you know, a social worker feels that they would benefit from some of those services, but also 360 is part of our intervention piece, so that if once a infraction has occurred, part of that discipline could be to have them seek out a 360 youth counselor. So it's both.
Yeah, it's our understanding that, unfortunately, we're not part of the referral process, so we're not really sure exactly who gets picked, but I know that they really try to look for students who aren't receiving outside services somewhere else and have some type of barrier to do that. For alternative to suspension specifically, I believe it's offered like the first time there's an infraction, and then I believe if that were to continue to happen again, then I don't think they would be. We haven't had a situation where we've been referred the same student twice.
Okay.
I don't believe, unless the first time they didn't want to do it, and then they said, okay, now I'm ready to do it.
Okay.
That was the other component that we were going to talk about, is that sometimes, especially At the middle school level, some parents are a little nervous about allowing another adult to talk to their student because they're not certain where their student is in the ability to process through a social emotional concern, especially if they're sixth grader. But as students become older and the parents begin to realize that some of the stakes are becoming a little higher, now they begin to think about, okay, how can I get my student or my child as much help as I can possibly get? And then they become a little bit more accepting of a social emotional based intervention that for some families is just not acceptable. The Hillman family would not have been about the social emotional intervention. Mr. and Mrs. Hillman, my parents, would have been about correct your behavior now. You've made a conscious choice. You don't do that again. That is a mentality that my parents had. For the most part, worked with me, and we just need to help parents realize that there are other sources out there to help students who are struggling.
That's a great point and question I wanted to ask, though, because having a daughter just coming out of middle school, kind of my focus has been in middle school lately, and I've talked to principals, I've talked to SROs at the middle school level, and I don't know if administration has had these conversations, specifically the three of you, and consulted with companies like 360 or Kids Matter or what have you, but when we look at discipline, or not even discipline, let's go social emotional, when we look at social media or coping skills when it comes to anxiety or depression or resources, are we starting too late? Because what I'm hearing from some middle school principals is by the time these kids already get to middle school, they're already way more farther ahead in social media or already experiencing anxiety or depression. Now, again, it might not be a conversation for every kid and for every family, but we already know a lot of it's taking place. And some of these kids may be already going down a wrong path and whatever it is, So are we having those conversations too late in health class? Are we waiting too late to have a discussion on social media in 7th and 8th grade when they should be learning about it in 5th or 6th grade? So it's questions like that I keep thinking, like, have we waited too long?
Mark, that's why I think we've moved into the middle school. I think we understood that the high school is one way, and then we're moving to the middle school. And, in terms, we could always do more. And I think we have to be aware that we could always do more. But I think the effort is there. And if you see how many school districts are partnering with social service agencies in order to assist their schools, you probably could do it on one or two hands.
I mean, if we can only get 30 people to come to a vaping presentation, I can't imagine how many we would get for
So I think
social emotional.
I think your questions are valid, but I think at least we're on the right path and moving it. I think raising those questions is important.
3 points I'd like to make real quickly. I'd like to move from the language of restorative justice to restorative measures. That's the language that's actually used in the statute, and I think that's defined, and I think that would be more beneficial to our conversation. Justice can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, and then we get into having to define it. So restorative measures, I think, provides some clarity. Negative behavior, the discipline, and the impact of supports. There's a lot of factors that go into that. Home life, parents, income, truancy, and you can go on and on. Bias, discrimination, and extracurricular engagements. And what's interesting for me is that we never know exactly what is the trigger that fixes it. You might have the Hillman discipline package, and that impacts, but for a different student, there needs to be a different, and from a scientific standpoint, you never have like control groups, and you can never really figure it out. And so all we can really do is try and try again and try again to, okay, this didn't work, let's try this. And you don't know if that support had the benefit that you wanted it, but maybe there was a decrease in behavior, so you don't really care. I love the partnership with 360. I think it's a great, you guys are part of the subject matter experts here in dealing with this. We don't have to recreate the wheel, and it's a more efficient use of the district's resources. So thank you for coming out for the presentation.
And so as a point of order, I do want to recognize Harley Jones, who's the Executive Director of 360.
That's a good idea, Mr. President.
Who was with us the entire time, so welcome. And my guess is those people sitting in the back perhaps might be some of your board members.
I do. I want to thank you on behalf of 360 Youth Services for the partnership.
You want to step up to the mic over here?
He doesn't really need one.
It's for the people on the TV.
Okay.
Thank you. Hi, once again, my name is Harley Jones. I'm the CEO at 360 Youth Services. I want to thank the board for our partnership. It's absolutely tremendous. I think the outcomes we've seen, not only this time last year, but the continued expansion, it speaks volumes to the work that we do together. So thank you to Dr. Sullivan and all of you. I'd like to recognize our two board members in the back there. Marty Ives on the left, if you'll please stand. Marty Ives is our current treasurer and will be our board chair in a little less than a month, helping me steer the ship at 360. Marty, so thank you for being here. And then next to him is Jen Jones. Jen is a longtime board member with 360 and instrumental in helping us build this program and also helping create the support that we have to help that partnership, both on the funding side as we think about outcomes as well. So thank you all so much.
You brought along somebody else who's familiar to the district. Who's that?
Who is that guy?
Mr. Altenburn, who needs no introduction here at 204. Jason, who is our Director for Development, is instrumental every single day in helping tell the story of 360, but also of this innovative program so that we can go out and continue to invite people to invest in the programs like this that are making such a difference in the youth here in 204 and throughout our community. So Jason, thank you. I think he still has a key to the building.
Let's get that back. Yeah.
Got it. Got it.
Get that back.
But thank you all so much.
I don't know if I cut you off, Mr. Carubas. I'm sorry.
It was a good cutoff. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. We now move to the action item portion, and that's our resolutions. And I can guarantee parents and anyone else, this is kind of board business, and so we welcome you to stay, but if you would like to leave, you could watch it on tape, and you'll probably say, maybe didn't miss
Maybe
that
not.
much.
Maybe not.
So one of the things that we do in terms of the board is we work with the Illinois Association of School Boards, who has their own resolutions and belief statements. Those resolution and belief statements allow the Illinois Association of School Boards to develop advocacy, especially with the legislature. And so they ask every school board in the state of Illinois whether or not they have any proposed resolutions and belief statements for them to consider. We have two members who would like us to consider that. I guess as a point of order, and I'm going to just ask the board, should we consider each one of these separately, or should we
Yes.
I think we should.
have a motion separately?
Separate.
So I'm going to ask for a motion. We'll discuss Ms. Peel's first. And so do we have a motion? And I think the statement of resolution is for the Illinois Association of School Boards to provide safe and secure environment for all students and staff.
I move to adopt, for a resolution drafted by Kathy Peel to be presented to the IASB, with the understanding that the exact wording isn't needed, but the wording can be changed to assist with passage. Something like that. Got that, Jackie?
Yeah, on video.
So we have a motion.
No, I'll just wing it. We'll go with it. I'll fix it.
Love it.
We have a motion, we have a motion to have a second.
Can I second it? Okay.
Yes, I think you can. So we have a motion and second. Kathy, you want to review this with us, please?
Okay, so you guys should have a copy of basically the best practice considerations by the National Association of School Psychologists and the National Association of School Resource Officers. And that's where I ended up just pulling most of my information from. They've been meeting for years, since this was first made in 2014. It was updated again in April of 2017. They've talked extensively and also included the Sandy Hook organization, as well as the Alice Training Institute. So I think that's pretty significant weight behind their recommendations of what schools should be doing regarding keeping schools safe due to the shooting situations that we've had going on. So I've tweaked it a little bit more, like Justin said. It could get tweaked again once we submit it. It can get tweaked before we submit it tonight, if you guys would like. I put this together just because I added staff as well as students, because we do want to make sure our staff are safe. I also added the local level decision-making in it because that was, to me, a strong point, and I also think that's something that our school board association already agrees on. So I thought it was important to add that. Otherwise, it's fairly similar to what we had before.
And so what I think is important is you're emphasizing two things. One is the mental health considerations for the students, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And the other one is that should be up to the local school district or the governing body in order to make that decision.
Right. And it builds on one another. It's not like two-pronged things. It's just saying in order to ensure the safe well-being of our students and consider the social-emotional well-being, we need to be making those decisions at the local levels because they know our students, they know our community best.
Questions?
So, it's just an amended clarification under the current.
There is actually nothing about.
Oh, there isn't? No.
Not this. The only, I have it in my briefcase, but the only thing about schools is school climate, and it's more to do with bullying. That's the only one that's there right now, the belief statement. So this isn't really, I read through them a few times, so that's what I'm seeing. So this would be a new belief statement.
I think this is needed. I think it's very comprehensive, but yet, like Justin said, they may wordsmith it a little bit more, but I think the intent is there, and I definitely support this.
I agree with the intent, definitely. I had a conversation earlier regarding a policy that I thought related to ensuring that our schools and our students are safe from a manner of conversations and helping students understand, what are best practices for them and things that they should, best choices for them. And I think this is really, it's an important headway for us to move. I think that we could potentially look at you know, a couple of changes, but I think it's an important thing for us to consider and to submit. Okay.
With that, Jackie, call the roll.
Mr. Krubus?
Yes.
Ms. Pugh?
Aye.
Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Mr. Rising?
Aye.
Ms. Deming?
Aye.
Mr. Rasak?
Aye.
Ms. Price?
Aye.
Second one was more of a belief statement, suggested by Ms. Donahue. Do we have
This
a
last one was a belief statement, too.
There was a belief statement
is a
too,
belief statement,
okay. Thank you for that clarification. Do I have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education approve the proposed 2018 Illinois Association of School Boards resolutions and belief statements as prepared by Lori Donahue.
Second?
Ms. Donahue?
Okay, so we began discussion on this a little bit last time, and I worked on 3 variations of a belief statement related to encouraging nonpartisan civic responsibility, including voter registration for students. The IASB people did look at this and had a slight preference for the second one. They didn't want to have any mandate type of language. I also talked with the McCormick Foundation organization, and they were very encouraging, but that's also all about civic responsibility in the state. But felt that it was in line with the direction that the state was moving in recent moves to require civics in all of the high schools. So I didn't draft up any further verbiage around this. It was a simple statement, and Justin was looking at it also.
Yeah, Kathy's been down this
Yeah,
process
Kathy.
before, so she was doing the paper that we submit to the resolution committee.
Yeah.
I was looking into getting the authority to pass it at the resolution committee. What I did last time is do a review of what the other states are doing to see if Illinois is in line with what Indiana and Michigan are doing, because that kind of provides some weight one way or the other. But I haven't completed that. I haven't done my homework.
So do you think we're going to include a statement of rationale and all this kind of information? That's part of the process, correct?
That's a process, right? But I like to have my ducks in a row so that it's all lines up. Like you said, when you went to IASB and they said 2 is the better one, it's better to start on 2 rather than bump your toe around. So that's something I learned going through the process first. If I would have had some of the support needed to get it passed initially, I would have tweaked the resolution. But I can get behind number 2. I think in the limited research I've done to date, I think ISB should have a belief statement similar to that.
So do we have to tweak our motion?
Yep.
So can we?
Well, if we focus the motion down, I think the motion was talking about all 3, but we're discussing, let's see where everybody, if we want to just approve 2, then that's a different, but let's talk.
I like 2, too. I mean, 2's great. I almost keep reading them, and I'm not seeing the difference.
It's getting late.
I'm like, where's the difference? I still don't see it. So, yeah, 2 works for me.
Oh, I see the difference, the value of educating students versus the value of student nonpartisan civic responsibility.
Okay.
Right, the word
So-
education with
Exactly.
educating.
Okay.
Exactly. I support 2. I like the wording of that. I think it may provide the least, have the least pushback.
I'm okay with 2. And I
think
can
it's a-
change my motion.
I think it's a really good idea too, but we need to get more of our populace who can vote to vote, and I think this is a great step to encourage it from the adults who the kids never see.
Yeah, I mean, I went through and read all of the belief statements that were up there, and it was quite surprising. Some of them were up there before my time or whatever, but I think this is a critical item for the IASB to have a statement on. I do.
I mean, I'll reiterate what I said before. I don't think public schools or any school should get in the business of registering people to vote. However, I think this is broad enough and vague enough. It's not saying that schools have to register students to vote. To me, it's left up to the districts and the schools. It's just stressing the importance that students should register to vote. So as long as it stays away from, that, I'm fine with it.
Because some of our schools are, I think we had this discussion previously, but correct me. Some of our schools are already registering students.
I know some teachers do, some schools do, yes. But
Okay.
I don't think as a district, it's something that we should be in the business of doing. Just a personal preference. I mean,
So we're at the point maybe of amending
Yep.
the motion. I'm going to ask Ms. Price.
I would like to amend my motion, Mr. President. I move that the Board of Education approve statement number 2 of Lori Donahue's presentation on voter registration to the Illinois Association of School Boards Resolutions and Beliefs Statements. Is that
Second.
good enough?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? With that, Jackie, call the roll.
Just a minute. Just have to have something in here. Don't pay attention to it. Lori Price?
Aye.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's getting late. Mr. Carubus?
Yes.
Ms. Peel?
Aye.
Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Mr. Rising?
Aye.
Ms. Deming?
Aye.
Mr. Razak?
Aye. Motion passes.
My apologies, Ms. Price.
What did you,
She's Lori Price. I'm sorry, I'm like,
I've been
Last-
called worse.
Last agenda item is a Board of Education update. Just very briefly, on June 1st and June 2nd, this board met. And worked on board goals and also worked with the administration in terms of district goals. I think we came to general consensus and agreement, and we are in the process of tweaking the language of those goals and objectives and board goals to be shared with the public, but we're still in that process. But it was a very productive meeting. And also, I'd like to say on June 6th, the Indian Prairie Foundation had their annual board planning meeting in which they recapped 2018-19 school year, provided recaps in terms of grants, board updates, and a budget and financial overview. And they're looking forward to the 30th anniversary back to school bash on August 25th, and also setting their goals and objectives for the 18-19 school year. If there's no questions, I'm
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
all in favor, say.
Aye.